For nearly 3 decades, Ernie Hayes stood as an unshakable pillar in gospel music, his voice carrying hope into living rooms across the nation, his songs weaving faith into the fabric of countless lives. To the world, he was more than a singer, he was a sanctuary. Fans didn't just admire him, they trusted him. They saw a man whose life seemed as steady as the hymns he sang, whose smile never faltered, whose presence radiated an almost supernatural calm. But behind every composed public appearance, behind every perfectly delivered performance, there existed a private world that remained carefully, deliberately hidden. And for 61 years his wife watched that world from the shadows, never speaking, never explaining, never defending what she knew to be true. Until now. What she's finally revealing isn't what anyone expected, and the reason she stayed silent for so long will change everything you thought you knew about faith, marriage, and the crushing weight of living under constant scrutiny. The whispers started small, the way they always do. Not with accusations, not with proof, just with questions that seemed innocent enough. How was Ernie's health? Was the marriage solid? Why did they seem so distant at that last event? These weren't questions born from concern. They were seeds of doubt planted by curiosity and watered by distance. Because when you can't see something clearly, your mind fills in the blanks, and the human imagination is far more creative than reality ever needs to be. Social media turned those whispers into echoes. Fan forums transformed casual observations into theories. A missed smile became evidence of depression. A separate travel schedule became proof of separation. And with each share, each comment, each speculative post, the narrative grew more elaborate, more convincing, more detached from anything resembling truth. What made it worse was the silence. In an era where celebrities rushed to Instagram at the first sign of controversy, where public figures issue statements before breakfast, Ernie Hayes and his wife did something almost unthinkable. They said nothing. Absolutely nothing. And to a culture addicted to immediate answers, that silence felt like confirmation. But here's what you need to understand about Ernie Hayes before we go any further. His entire career was built on a foundation that had nothing to do with fame. From the very beginning, his focus wasn't on topping charts or filling arenas. It was about message, about meaning, about reaching people in their darkest moments and offering them something to hold on to. His voice became famous because it was warm, because it felt like sitting across from someone who genuinely cared about your struggles, because it carried an authenticity that couldn't be manufactured or faked. Throughout his career, Ernie maintained something incredibly rare in the entertainment industry, a spotless reputation. He didn't court controversy, didn't get caught in scandals, didn't exploit his platform for personal gain. He showed up, sang his heart out, spoke words of encouragement, and went home. To millions, he represented what a faith-based life should look like, steady, strong, unshakable. But every public persona, no matter how genuine, conceals a private reality. The touring schedules that keep you away from home for months, the constant travel that turns airports into second homes, the pressure to always be strong when people are watching, to always have the right words when someone needs encouragement, to always maintain that smile even when exhaustion is eating you alive from the inside. Those quiet moments backstage, in hotel rooms, during long drives between cities, that's where Ernie's real strength was tested. Not on stage where the lights were bright and the crowd was cheering, but in the silence afterward when he was alone with his thoughts, his doubts, his weariness. The public never saw those moments, because Ernie understood something crucial about his calling. People needed him to be steady. They needed to believe that faith could carry you through anything, and he refused to let his private struggles undermine that message, even when carrying that weight became almost unbearable. Standing beside him through all of it was a woman whose strength the world never properly recognized because it wasn't loud, wasn't public, wasn't designed for applause. And what she's revealing now isn't scandal, isn't betrayal, isn't any of the dramatic revelations that tabloids pray for. It's something far more profound, the simple, devastating truth about what happens when silence gets misinterpreted, when privacy gets mistaken for secrecy, when a couple's decision to protect something sacred gets twisted into evidence of something sinister. For years, Ernie Hayes brought comfort and faith to audiences who desperately needed both. People wrestling with doubt, drowning in grief, suffocating under the weight of uncertainty found solace in his music. But beneath that unwavering presence existed a life shaped by the exact same pressures that impact every long-term marriage. Time apart that stretches weeks into months. Emotional exhaustion that leaves nothing in the tank for the people you love most. The relentless effort required to keep a relationship alive when you're living under a microscope, when strangers feel entitled to judge every interaction. Here's what people don't understand. Those realities don't indicate failure. They indicate life, real life, the kind that doesn't fit neatly into Instagram captions or 30-second TikTok clips. His wife's decision to finally speak wasn't about defense, it was about balance. She didn't come forward to refute every lie or fight back against keyboard warriors who'd spent years constructing elaborate theories. Instead, she chose to offer perspective. And when perspective is offered calmly, without anger, without theatrics, it carries a power that shouting never could. Her words didn't demand understanding. They invited it. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be legitimate. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most weight because they're not competing for attention, they're simply stating what is. This moment also exposes a deeper problem in contemporary culture. The assumption that public figures owe us access to their private pain. We've created an environment where silence is automatically interpreted as guilt, where privacy is seen as avoidance, where anyone with a platform is expected to justify every aspect of their personal life to complete strangers. But this assumption ignores a fundamental truth. Not every chapter of a person's life is meant to be discussed, dissected, or evaluated by people who've never met them and have no actual stake in their well-being. The rumors had no foundation in evidence. They were born from distance, nurtured by imagination, and amplified by social media platforms that prioritize emotion over accuracy. Once a story gains traction, its actual veracity becomes almost irrelevant. What matters is how compelling it is, how shareable, how perfectly it fits into existing narratives. That's when real damage begins. What set this situation apart was the deliberate absence of response. When everyone expected them to feed the cycle with statements and explanations, they chose restraint. Some people found that infuriating. How dare they not give us the answers we feel entitled to? But that restraint also preserves something increasingly rare: dignity. Choosing to remain composed when the world is demanding reaction, that's not weakness. In a culture that glorifies anger, that celebrates viral takedowns, the ability to stay calm is actually a profound demonstration of strength. It says, I don't need your validation to know what's true. The truth that was eventually revealed wasn't polished or perfect. It didn't present an idealized vision of faith or a flawless marriage. Instead, it offered something far more relatable. A partnership that weathered pressure, navigated change, and survived misunderstanding without making its private struggles into public spectacle. Her voice resonated precisely because it lacked theatrics. There was no dramatic music, no tears for the camera, no carefully stage-managed vulnerability, just honesty delivered calmly about a life that looked nothing like the stories people had invented. This narrative also raises uncomfortable questions about how society views women who choose to remain in the background. Ernie Hayes' wife wasn't invisible because she was unimportant. She was invisible because she chose a different kind of presence, one based on support rather than recognition. But in her absence, people projected assumptions. They decided what her silence meant, mistook quiet power for weakness, mistook intentional privacy for oppression, mistook a deliberate choice for victimhood. Faith plays a subtle but significant role in this story, not the performative version of religion that gets displayed on stages, but the kind of endurance it demands on a personal level. Faith doesn't eliminate hardship, it reframes it. Faith teaches patience when reacting feels natural. It cultivates humility when pride demands you fight back. For Ernie Hayes and his wife, faith wasn't a shield against rumors, it was a compass for navigating them. It gave them the strength to wait when everyone else was demanding immediate action. It gave them the wisdom to protect their marriage when the culture was demanding they expose it. The public's response to her statement was divided, but more subdued than anticipated. Many supporters were relieved. Others acknowledged that the lack of response led them to believe rumors. Accusations gave way to understanding. Some critics didn't change their minds, demonstrating that some people are more interested in drama than facts. But she never cared about that. It was her duty to speak truthfully once, not to persuade everyone. Her serene tone was more noticeable than the actual topic. There was no guilt, no rage, no need for pity, just clarity. And clarity itself felt powerful. This should also prompt audiences to reflect on their own role in spreading misinformation. Every click on a speculative article, every share of an unverified rumor, every comment that treats someone's private life as entertainment extends the life of a false narrative. The decision to pause, verify, and think critically isn't optional. It's a responsibility. Media literacy is an act of respect for the real human beings behind public names, who feel the weight of every false accusation. Fundamentally, this was never a story about rumors. It was a story about restraint in an age of excess, about choosing depth over spectacle, about understanding that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes strength waits quietly until it's actually needed. As Ernie Hayes continues forward, his legacy remains defined by consistency rather than controversy. When his wife's voice was finally heard, it didn't change history, it completed it. Together they demonstrated that intentional lives don't always require justification, that choosing privacy doesn't mean hiding something shameful. In a culture that demands constant access, protecting what's sacred isn't secrecy, it's self-respect. The woman who is Ernie Hayes' wife never sought attention from the public sphere. From the very beginning, she made a deliberate choice to remain outside the spotlight. When many partners of public figures actively seek visibility, she chose privacy, not because she had something to hide, but because she valued peace over recognition. Her role wasn't defined by interviews or social media presence. Instead, it was defined by emotional fortitude, by patience, by support that remained constant. When schedules shifted unexpectedly, when travel became exhausting, when expectations felt overwhelming, she provided consistency. While Ernie's voice was heard by millions, her strength remained quiet, invisible to everyone except the person who needed it most. As years passed and people noticed her absence from the public eye, they began filling that void with assumptions. Some interpreted distance as isolation, others mistook quiet support for weakness. But her silence was a choice rooted in conviction. Certain aspects of life are sacred and don't require public explanation. She fulfilled this role without complaint for years, believing that truth doesn't always need to be defended. Even when it became painful to watch strangers construct elaborate narratives about her life online, she maintained that conviction. But silence, while powerful, becomes increasingly difficult to bear alone over time. The rumors didn't begin with dramatic announcements. They started as whispered observations in fan communities, subtle questions on social media, a pause that lasted slightly too long, a response that seemed less enthusiastic than expected. Gradually, imagination filled in all the empty spaces. Some questioned the stability of the marriage. Others expressed concern about health issues that existed only in speculation. Despite the complete absence of evidence, these theories gained credibility through sheer repetition. The simple truth was this: nobody outside their immediate circle actually knew anything. But silence provided fertile ground for speculation to flourish. What hurt more than the rumors themselves was how easily they spread, how quickly stories constructed by strangers began carrying more weight than actual truth. Yet the couple chose not to respond. They understood that fighting rumors would only extend their lifespan, but that choice came with a cost. When truth remains silent, misunderstandings often speak louder. So why did they choose silence for so long? For them, silence was never weakness. It was a deliberate decision grounded in deeply held beliefs. They believed their marriage could withstand public scrutiny without requiring public validation. Responding to every rumor would have necessitated inviting complete strangers into spaces that were never meant for public consumption. Both believed that truth, when given sufficient time, eventually stands on its own. They'd witnessed how quickly public opinion shifts, how today's scandal becomes tomorrow's forgotten headline. Engaging with rumors would have pulled them into a cycle they fundamentally opposed. However, silence carries its own emotional weight. Watching people rewrite your experience, speak authoritatively about your pain based on nothing but speculation, that's incredibly difficult. Ernie's wife carried this burden privately for years, but the longer the silence continued, the louder outside voices became. Eventually, that silence stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling heavy. Not because the rumors contained truth, but because they were drowning out what actually mattered. That's when she understood something crucial. Speaking wasn't about defense anymore, it was about clarity. The turning point wasn't driven by external pressure or mounting anger. It emerged from deep personal reflection. Life looks different at 61. Priorities shift. Things that once seemed easy to ignore suddenly feel important to address, not for external validation, but for internal peace. She came to a realization that changed everything. Silence was no longer protecting truth, it was allowing lies to spread unchecked. She didn't want attention or sympathy. What she wanted was balance, an opportunity to gently correct misunderstandings. This moment of decision arrived quietly after lengthy conversations and introspection. She understood that speaking wouldn't silence everyone, wouldn't convince every skeptic, but her voice would exist alongside the noise, would provide an alternative to speculation. Her objective was simple: replace rumor with reality, exchange confusion for clarity. And when she did finally speak, her words lacked any trace of drama. They were steady, thoughtful, and profoundly human. When she addressed the rumors, she didn't present a list of grievances or assign blame. Instead, she focused on what genuinely mattered, the reality of their shared life. She explained with disarming honesty that marriage is never simple, especially when it coexists with public ministry. Real marriage requires patience, space, ongoing understanding. She acknowledged there were times of distance, not emotional separation, but the physical and emotional exhaustion that accumulates from years of demanding schedules. These weren't indicators of collapse, they were normal moments that virtually every long-term couple experiences. There was no hidden scandal, no secret separation, no explosive confrontation. What existed instead was an authentic partnership between two real people who prioritized genuine commitment over performative perfection. By being truthful, she didn't portray their relationship as flawless. She portrayed it as real. She reminded everyone that meaningful truth doesn't require spectacle to carry weight. Living a faith-based life in the public eye creates a particular kind of pressure. There's an assumption that spiritual leaders should be immune to normal human struggles. But faith doesn't eliminate hardship. It provides the strength to face hardship honestly. Public expectations can subtly transform into suffocating obligations. You're expected to smile regardless of how you feel. Vulnerability is frequently misinterpreted as weakness. This doesn't make you less authentic, it makes you more protective of your private life. For them, faith was never about maintaining appearances, it was fundamentally about endurance. During moments of uncertainty or exhaustion, they turned inward rather than outward. They chose prayer over public explanation, reflection over immediate reaction. This approach aligned perfectly with their values, and that foundational decision influenced everything that followed. When her statement became public, the response was divided but notably more subdued than anticipated. Numerous supporters expressed genuine relief. Others admitted that the prolonged absence of response had led them to believe rumors must contain some truth. In many corners, accusations gave way to understanding. However, some critics remained unmoved, proving that certain people are fundamentally more interested in sensational narratives than boring truth. But she never cared about convincing that audience. What struck many observers more than the content was the remarkably calm tone she maintained. There was no defensiveness, no anger, no plea for sympathy. Just clarity offered without apology. In today's chaotic media landscape where everyone seems to be shouting, that simple clarity felt powerful in its restraint. What this entire narrative actually teaches us extends far beyond one couple's experience. It's a profound illustration of how quickly assumptions become accepted as fact, how easily silence gets misinterpreted, how readily people construct elaborate theories about strangers' lives. It demonstrates that public figures are routinely expected to explain their private lives even when no explanation should be necessary. It reminds us that behind every famous name exists an actual person who experiences emotional weight and crushing pressure. The crucial difference is that their struggles get observed and judged by thousands of strangers who will never face consequences for being wrong. She didn't speak to rehabilitate her reputation. She spoke to preserve reality itself, to ensure that truth existed somewhere in the record. And in doing so, she offered something increasingly rare, genuine peace amid overwhelming noise, quiet truth in a space dominated by manufactured drama. In the final analysis, the truth behind the rumors was never shocking. It was deeply, profoundly human. A long marriage tested by real challenges. A difficult life lived with integrity. Quiet strength that chose patience over reaction. At 61, Ernie Hayes continues his journey with the same steady presence that has defined his entire career. And beside him stands a woman whose strength never required a spotlight to be real, whose voice, when finally heard, wasn't a roar demanding attention but a whisper offering comfort to anyone willing to truly listen.